Question 1. Process analysis reveals that the organization's purchasing department has a system for selecting suppliers based on competitive pricing and timely delivery. Upon receiving materials, the receiving personnel visually inspect the packaging for damage, but do not routinely verify the accompanying documentation against the purchase order's quality specifications or the supplier's quality certifications. The purchasing manager states that they trust their established suppliers to provide compliant products. Which of the following internal audit findings would be most appropriate given this scenario and the requirements of ISO 13485? Option A. The organization has sufficient controls in place for purchased products as visual inspection of packaging is a standard practice in the industry. Option B. The organization's purchasing department effectively manages supplier risk by prioritizing cost savings and delivery efficiency. Option C. The organization's purchasing process adequately ensures product quality by relying on the reputation and established relationships with key suppliers. Option D. The organization has not established and maintained documented procedures for the control of purchased product, including verification activities to ensure purchased product conforms to specified purchase requirements, as required by ISO 13485 Clause 7. 4. 1. Correct answer is D. The organization has not established and maintained documented procedures for the control of purchased product, including verification activities to ensure purchased product conforms to specified purchase requirements, as required by ISO 13485 Clause 7. 4. 1. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, ensuring that purchased products and services consistently meet specified requirements, which is critical for patient safety and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient procurement with the rigorous demands of the ISO 13485 standard, particularly concerning supplier evaluation, control, and the documentation that substantiates these activities. A deep understanding of the purchasing process as defined by ISO 13485 is essential for an internal auditor to identify potential nonconformities and recommend effective corrective actions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the requirements of ISO 13485 Clause 7. 4. Purchasing. Specifically, it focuses on verifying that the supplier's quality system is adequate, that the purchased product conforms to specified purchase requirements, and that the necessary documentation, like certificates of analysis or conformance, is obtained and reviewed. This proactive verification ensures that the supplier's output is suitable for use in the medical device, thereby mitigating risks associated with non-conforming materials or components. It aligns with the ethical responsibility to ensure product safety and efficacy. An incorrect approach that overlooks the need for documented evidence of supplier evaluation and product verification fails to meet the requirements of ISO 13485. Specifically, it could violate Clause 7. 4. 1. Which mandates the establishment and maintenance of purchasing information and controls. Relying solely on the supplier's self-declaration without independent verification or documented evidence of their quality system's adequacy is a significant regulatory failure. It also poses an ethical risk by potentially introducing non-conforming materials into the manufacturing process, jeopardizing patient safety. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the price and delivery timeline, neglecting the quality aspects of the purchased product and the supplier's quality system, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the purchasing process in a regulated environment. This ignores the core principle of ISO 13485, which prioritizes product quality and safety over mere cost-effectiveness. Such an approach would likely lead to nonconformities during subsequent manufacturing or final product testing, resulting in regulatory issues and potential recalls. A third incorrect approach that assumes all suppliers are inherently compliant without any form of ongoing monitoring or reevaluation is also a regulatory failure. ISO 13485 Clause 7. 4. 1. Requires the organization to ensure that purchased products conform to its specified purchase requirements. This implies a need for controls and verification, including the potential for reevaluation of suppliers based on performance. Without this, the organization cannot demonstrate due diligence in its supplier management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the purchasing process against the specific requirements of ISO 13485. Auditors should 1. Understand the organization's documented purchasing procedures. 2. Examine evidence of supplier selection and evaluation, including initial assessments and ongoing monitoring. 3. Verify that purchase orders clearly define the required specifications and quality attributes. 4. Review incoming inspection records and evidence of product conformity verification. 5. Assess the adequacy of documentation received from suppliers, e.g., certificates of analysis, certificates of conformance. 6. Identify any deviations or nonconformities related to purchased products and the corrective actions taken. 7. Evaluate the effectiveness of the overall purchasing control process in ensuring product quality and regulatory compliance. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates that the current risk management process, while documented, may not be effectively identifying all potential hazards associated with new product designs, and that the monitoring of implemented risk controls is inconsistent. As an internal auditor for a medical device manufacturer operating under ISO 13485, which approach best addresses these concerns to ensure the QMS remains effective? Option A. Focus the audit on the design control process, as the feedback relates to new product designs, and defer a detailed review of the risk management process until a later audit cycle. Option B. Review the risk management procedure for completeness against ISO 13485 requirements and accept it as compliant, assuming the stakeholder feedback is based on isolated incidents. Option C. Advise management to immediately update the risk management procedure to include more stringent documentation requirements for hazard identification and control monitoring, without further audit investigation. Option D. Conduct a targeted audit of the risk management process, focusing on the effectiveness of hazard identification techniques, the rigor of risk assessment methodologies, the verification of control implementation, and the adequacy of monitoring activities, using the feedback as a starting point for deeper investigation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a targeted audit of the risk management process, focusing on the effectiveness of hazard identification techniques, the rigor of risk assessment methodologies, the verification of control implementation, and the adequacy of monitoring activities, using the feedback as a starting point for deeper investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, ensuring the risk management process remains effective and aligned with evolving stakeholder feedback and regulatory expectations. The challenge lies in translating qualitative feedback into actionable improvements within a structured, documented process like ISO 13485. Internal auditors must assess not just the existence of a risk management process, but its practical application and continuous improvement, particularly when signals suggest potential gaps. The need for a deep dive into the risk management process, from identification to monitoring, requires auditors to go beyond superficial checks and evaluate the robustness and responsiveness of the system. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on a systematic review of the risk management process as defined by ISO 13485, specifically Clause 7, 1. Planning of product realization, and Clause 8, 2. 1. Internal audit. It involves examining the documented risk management procedure, its implementation across the product lifecycle, and the effectiveness of controls and monitoring activities. This approach directly addresses the stakeholder feedback by seeking evidence of how identified risks are managed, how controls are verified, and how monitoring data informs ongoing risk assessment and mitigation. It aligns with the principle of continuous improvement inherent in ISO 13485 and the regulatory expectation that risk management is an integral part of the QMS, not a standalone activity. The emphasis on evidence-based assessment, linking feedback to specific process steps and outputs, is crucial for an effective internal audit. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the stakeholder feedback as anecdotal and rely solely on the documented risk management procedure without investigating its practical application. This fails to acknowledge the dynamic nature of risk and the importance of real-world observations in validating the QMS. It represents a failure to conduct a thorough audit that probes beyond the surface level, potentially overlooking critical deficiencies in risk identification, assessment, or control. Ethically, it could lead to a false sense of compliance, leaving patient safety and product quality vulnerable. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the risk management procedure's documentation, without verifying its implementation or the effectiveness of the controls and monitoring activities. This treats the QMS as a paper exercise, neglecting the operational reality. It fails to assess whether the documented process actually mitigates risks or if the monitoring mechanisms are sufficient to detect emerging issues. This approach is a direct contravention of the audit objective to verify the effectiveness of the QMS. A third incorrect approach might involve implementing new risk management tools or procedures based solely on the feedback, without first understanding the root cause of any perceived deficiencies within the existing framework. This reactive approach risks creating additional complexity without addressing the underlying issues, and could lead to non-compliance if the new methods are not properly integrated or validated according to ISO 13485 requirements. It bypasses the systematic evaluation and improvement cycle mandated by the standard. Professional reasoning. When faced with stakeholder feedback suggesting potential issues with the risk management process, an internal auditor should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging and documenting the feedback. 2. Planning the audit scope to specifically address the areas indicated by the feedback, focusing on the risk management process, identification, assessment, control, and monitoring, as per ISO 13485. 3. Gathering objective evidence through interviews, document reviews, and observation of work practices related to risk management activities. 4. Evaluating the effectiveness of the risk management process against the requirements of ISO 13485 and the organization's own documented procedures. 5. Identifying any nonconformities or opportunities for improvement. 6. Reporting findings clearly and concisely, linking them to specific requirements and potential impacts on product safety and quality. 7. Recommending corrective actions that address the root cause of any identified issues and promote continuous improvement. Question 3. To address the challenge of ensuring that documented procedures and work instructions for critical manufacturing processes are not only present, but also effectively implemented and contribute to risk mitigation for a medical device manufacturer, which internal audit approach would best ensure compliance with ISO 13485-2016 requirements? Option A. Evaluate the alignment of documented procedures and work instructions with actual work practices observed on the production floor, and assess their effectiveness in controlling identified risks and ensuring product conformity. Option B. Accept management's assurance that procedures and work instructions are being followed and are effective, without independent verification of implementation. Option C. Conduct a high volume of audits across all QMS areas, prioritizing completion over the depth of findings related to specific procedures and work instructions. Option D. Verify the existence of documented procedures and work instructions for all critical manufacturing processes, and confirm they are approved and readily accessible to relevant personnel. The correct answer is A. Evaluate the alignment of documented procedures and work instructions with actual work practices observed on the production floor, and assess their effectiveness in controlling identified risks and ensuring product conformity. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where documented procedures and work instructions, while existing, may not accurately reflect actual practices or adequately address emerging risks. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the QMS documentation remains a living, effective tool for maintaining product quality and regulatory compliance, rather than a static, bureaucratic hurdle. This requires an internal auditor to move beyond mere procedural checks and assess the practical implementation and effectiveness of these documents in controlling risks and ensuring device safety and performance. The correct approach represents best professional practice, because it directly addresses the core purpose of procedures and work instructions within an ISO 13485 framework, to ensure consistent, controlled processes that mitigate risks and maintain product quality. By evaluating the alignment of documented procedures with actual work practices and assessing their effectiveness in risk control. The auditor is fulfilling their mandate to provide assurance on the QMS's ability to meet regulatory requirements and customer expectations. This proactive and risk-based approach is fundamental to effective internal auditing in the highly regulated medical device industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the existence of documented procedures without verifying their implementation or effectiveness fails to provide meaningful assurance. This is a regulatory failure because ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 4.2.1 requires that the QMS documentation be appropriate to the product, and that procedures shall be established, implemented, and maintained. Simply having a document does not equate to effective implementation. Ethically, it fails to uphold the auditor's responsibility to identify and report potential nonconformities that could impact patient safety. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the completion of a high volume of audits over the depth of their findings is also professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is important, the primary objective of an internal audit is to identify areas of noncompliance and opportunities for improvement. Rushing through audits to meet quantity targets compromises the quality of the audit and the ability to uncover critical issues. This is a regulatory failure, as it undermines the systematic and thorough nature of the QMS required by ISO 13485 2016 Clause 8.2.4 Internal Audit. It also represents an ethical lapse in professional diligence. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on management's assurance without independent verification is a significant professional and regulatory failure. ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 8.2.4 mandates that internal audits be conducted to determine whether the QMS conforms to planned arrangements, to the requirements of the standard, and to requirements established by the organization, and whether the QMS is effectively implemented and maintained. Management's assurance is not a substitute for objective evidence gathered through an independent audit process. This approach fails to provide the necessary objective evidence and can lead to a false sense of compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based approach. Auditors should first identify critical processes and documentation that have the greatest impact on product safety and regulatory compliance. They should then plan audits to thoroughly assess the implementation and effectiveness of these critical elements, gathering objective evidence through observation, interviews, and document review. The focus should always be on the effectiveness of the QMS, not just its existence. This involves asking not only is this documented, but also is this being done correctly, and is it achieving the intended results? Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that the documented quality policy for the medical device QMS is approved and accessible on the company's internal portal. Which of the following audit approaches would best assess the effectiveness of its communication and implementation across the organization? Option A. Interviewing key personnel from different departments, e.g., R&D, production, quality assurance, to ascertain their understanding of the quality policy and how it influences their daily work and decision-making. Option B. Reviewing the minutes of management review meetings to confirm that the quality policy was discussed as part of the QMS effectiveness evaluation. Option C. Examining the training records to confirm that all employees have received general QMS awareness training, which includes a mention of the quality policy. Option D. Verifying that the quality policy document has been reviewed and approved by top management, and that its revision history is maintained. Correct answer is A. Interviewing key personnel from different departments, e.g., R&D, production, quality assurance, to ascertain their understanding of the quality policy and how it influences their daily work and decision-making. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in ensuring the effective integration of the quality policy into the daily operations of a medical device manufacturer. The quality policy, as defined by ISO 13485, is a foundational element of the quality management system, QMS. Its development is a management responsibility, but its communication and understanding across all levels of the organization are critical for its practical implementation. The challenge lies in moving beyond mere documentation to demonstrable understanding and application, particularly in a regulated environment where non-compliance can have severe consequences. The internal auditor must assess not just the existence of the policy, but its tangible impact on decision-making and actions related to product quality and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on assessing the practical application and understanding of the quality policy by personnel involved in relevant processes. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5.3, which mandates that top management shall ensure the quality policy is understood, implemented, and maintained throughout the organization. An effective internal audit would involve interviewing personnel at various levels, reviewing process documentation, and observing activities to determine if the principles and commitments outlined in the quality policy are reflected in their work. This demonstrates best professional practice by verifying the policy's integration into the QMS and its influence on operational decisions, thereby ensuring it is not just a static document but a living guide for quality. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely review the documented quality policy for completeness and approval dates. This fails to address the core requirement of implementation and maintenance. It is a superficial check that does not provide assurance that the policy is understood or influencing behavior, leading to a potential regulatory failure under ISO 13485 Clause 5.3. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the quality policy is available on the company intranet, it is effectively communicated. Availability does not equate to understanding or application. This overlooks the need for active communication and verification of comprehension, which is essential for effective QMS implementation and regulatory compliance. A third incorrect approach might be to focus only on the quality department's understanding of the policy. The quality policy's impact is organization-wide, affecting all departments involved in the medical device lifecycle, from design and development to production and post-market surveillance. Limiting the assessment to the quality department would miss critical areas where the policy should be influencing decisions and actions, thus failing to provide a comprehensive audit of QMS effectiveness. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first understanding the intent and scope of the quality policy as defined by ISO 13485. The audit should then be planned to gather evidence of its practical application. This involves a risk-based approach, identifying key processes and personnel where the policy's influence is most critical. The auditor should employ a combination of document review, interviews, and observation. When interviewing personnel, questions should be designed to elicit their understanding of how the policy guides their daily tasks and decision-making. If any approach deviates from demonstrating practical application and understanding, the auditor must investigate further to identify the root cause and potential nonconformities. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent trend of understaffing in the quality control department, leading to increased overtime for existing personnel and a backlog in critical product release testing, despite top management's recent reaffirmation of their commitment to the QMS and patient safety during the annual quality review meeting. As an internal auditor, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Accept top management's stated commitment as sufficient evidence that the QMS is adequately resourced, and conclude that the observed trends are temporary operational challenges. Option B. Focus the audit solely on the documented procedures for product release testing, assuming that if the procedures are followed, the resource issue is a separate operational matter for management to resolve independently. Option C. Immediately escalate the issue to external regulatory authorities, citing a direct threat to patient safety due to the observed backlog. Option D. Document the observed understaffing and backlog in the audit report, highlighting the potential impact on QMS effectiveness and compliance with ISO 13485 requirements for resource availability, and recommend management review and action. Correct answer is D. Document the observed understaffing and backlog in the audit report, highlighting the potential impact on QMS effectiveness and compliance with ISO 13485 requirements for resource availability, and recommend management review and action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an internal auditor to navigate a conflict between the stated commitment to quality and the practical realities of resource allocation, directly impacting the effectiveness of the quality management system, QMS. The auditor must assess whether top management's actions align with their stated responsibilities under ISO 13485, specifically concerning their commitment to the QMS and the provision of necessary resources. The ethical dilemma arises from the potential for management to prioritize financial targets over patient safety and regulatory compliance, a core tenet of medical device QMS. The correct approach, which involves documenting the observed resource limitations and their potential impact on QMS effectiveness, represents best professional practice. This aligns directly with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 4.1, which mandates that top management establish, implement, and maintain a QMS. Crucially, Clause 4.1 also states that top management must ensure the availability of resources necessary for the QMS. By identifying and reporting these limitations, the auditor is fulfilling their responsibility to provide objective assurance on the QMS's compliance and effectiveness, thereby enabling top management to make informed decisions to rectify the situation and uphold their commitment to quality and patient safety. This proactive identification of risks is fundamental to a robust QMS. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking the resource limitations due to management's stated commitment would be a failure to exercise due professional care and skepticism. This would violate the auditor's responsibility to provide an objective assessment. It would also implicitly endorse a potentially non-compliant QMS, as the lack of resources could lead to nonconformities that might not be identified or addressed. Another incorrect approach, such as directly confronting top management with accusations of noncompliance without sufficient documented evidence or a structured audit finding, would be unprofessional and counterproductive. While the auditor's role is to identify issues, the process must be conducted in a manner that facilitates resolution, not alienation. This approach bypasses the established audit reporting mechanisms and could damage the auditor's credibility and the working relationship with management. A further incorrect approach, such as focusing solely on the documented procedures without considering the practical implementation and resource availability, would result in an incomplete audit. ISO 13485 requires that the QMS be effective in practice, not just on paper. Ignoring resource constraints means the audit fails to assess the true state of the QMS's operational effectiveness and its ability to consistently meet regulatory requirements and customer needs. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485 related to top management's responsibilities and resource allocation. 2. Gathering objective evidence of the observed resource limitations and their potential impact on QMS processes and product safety. 3. Documenting these observations clearly and concisely, linking them to specific ISO 13485 clauses or organizational procedures. 4. Communicating these findings through the established audit reporting channels, allowing top management the opportunity to review, respond, and implement corrective actions. 5. Maintaining professional skepticism and objectivity throughout the audit process, ensuring that stated commitments are supported by demonstrable actions and adequate resources. Question 6. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of the organization's quality management system, QMS, and its adherence to regulatory requirements. An internal audit has identified a finding indicating that while risk management activities are documented, they are not consistently integrated into the QMS processes, particularly in design and development, production, and post-market surveillance. The audit team needs to propose corrective actions. Which of the following approaches best addresses this finding in accordance with ISO 13485 requirements for a medical device QMS? Option A. Conduct additional risk assessments specifically for any new complaints received from the field, and document these as part of the complaint handling process. Option B. Review and update QMS documentation to explicitly link risk management activities to design controls, production processes, and post-market surveillance, ensuring risk considerations are integrated into all relevant procedures and work instructions. Option C. Provide enhanced training to the design and development team on advanced risk management techniques and tools. Option D. Develop a standalone risk management procedure that details all risk management activities, and ensure this procedure is accessible to relevant personnel. The correct answer is B. Review and update QMS documentation to explicitly link risk management activities to design controls, production processes, and post-market surveillance, ensuring risk considerations are integrated into all relevant procedures and work instructions. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where the integration of risk management, a fundamental requirement of ISO 13485, is not fully embedded into the QMS processes. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that risk management is not treated as a standalone activity, but as a continuous, proactive element that influences all stages of the product lifecycle and QMS operations. This requires a deep understanding of ISO 13485 clauses related to risk management, e.g. 7.1.8.2.1, and how they interrelate with other QMS elements like design and development, production, and post-market surveillance. Careful judgment is required to identify the systemic gaps and propose effective corrective actions that foster a risk-aware culture. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core of the audit finding, the lack of integration. By proposing to review and update the QMS documentation to explicitly link risk management activities to design controls, production processes, and post-market surveillance, the auditor is advocating for a systemic solution. This aligns with ISO 13485 emphasis on a process-based approach and the need for risk management to be applied throughout the product lifecycle. Specifically, it addresses the intent of clauses such as 7.1 planning of product realization and 8.2.1 control of documents, ensuring that risk considerations are proactively incorporated into planning and that documentation reflects this integration. This approach fosters a proactive and preventative QMS, which is a cornerstone of medical device regulation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on updating the risk management plan without addressing its integration into other QMS processes is professionally unacceptable. This represents a superficial fix that fails to address the systemic issue. It would be a regulatory failure because it does not demonstrate compliance with the spirit or intent of ISO 13485, which mandates risk management be applied throughout the QMS. Ethically, it fails to ensure the highest level of patient safety by not embedding risk mitigation into all relevant activities. Another incorrect approach that suggests conducting additional risk assessments only when new complaints arise, rather than proactively integrating risk management into all QMS processes, is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive approach is contrary to the principles of risk management and ISO 13485. It is a regulatory failure as it neglects the requirement for ongoing risk management and the proactive identification of hazards. Ethically, it prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, potentially leaving risks unaddressed until a problem manifests, which is unacceptable in the medical device industry. A further incorrect approach that proposes to train the design team on risk management techniques without revising the QMS procedures to mandate the application of these techniques would be professionally unacceptable. While training is important, it is insufficient if the QMS itself does not require the integration of risk management into design activities. This is a regulatory failure because it does not ensure that the QMS processes themselves are designed to incorporate risk management. Ethically, it places the burden of integration on individuals without the necessary systemic support, increasing the likelihood of oversight and potential patient harm. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thoroughly understanding the audit finding and its root cause, focusing on systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. 2. Referencing specific ISO 13485 clauses and their intent to identify the precise regulatory requirements being missed. 3. Evaluating proposed solutions based on their ability to achieve systemic integration and proactive risk management. 4. Prioritizing solutions that embed risk management into the core QMS processes, ensuring it influences decision-making at all levels. 5. Considering the impact on patient safety and product quality when assessing the effectiveness of proposed corrective actions. Question 7. Consider a scenario where the head of sales requests an immediate change to the labeling of a medical device to highlight a new feature, bypassing the standard change control procedure outlined in the quality management system, QMS, documentation. The head of R&D supports this request, stating that the change is minor and does not affect device performance. As an internal auditor for a medical device manufacturer operating under ISO 13485-2016, which approach best ensures the integrity and compliance of the QMS? Option A. Immediately approve the labeling change based on the assurance from the head of sales and head of R&D, as it is a commercial imperative and perceived as minor. Option B. Escalate the request to the quality manager and defer the decision entirely to their judgment without conducting an independent audit assessment of the proposed change. Option C. Verify that the requested labeling change has been processed through the formal QMS change control procedure, including risk assessment and appropriate approvals, before it is implemented. Option D. Accept the head of R&D's assertion that the change is minor and does not impact device performance, and document this in the audit report without requiring formal change control. The correct answer is C. Verify that the requested labeling change has been processed through the formal QMS change control procedure, including risk assessment and appropriate approvals, before it is implemented. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the internal auditor to balance the immediate needs and perspectives of different stakeholders with the overarching requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 for a robust quality management system. QMS. The challenge lies in discerning which stakeholders' input, if any, should supersede the established QMS processes and documentation, particularly when that input might lead to deviations from documented procedures. The auditor must exercise critical judgment to ensure that any proposed changes or interpretations are evaluated against the QMS's ability to consistently meet regulatory requirements and customer expectations for medical device safety and performance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established QMS and its underlying principles as defined by ISO 13485/2016. This standard mandates that the QMS be documented, implemented, and maintained to ensure that medical devices consistently meet customer and applicable regulatory requirements. By focusing on the documented procedures and the established change control process, the auditor upholds the integrity of the QMS. This approach ensures that any proposed modifications are subjected to a formal risk assessment and validation, preventing ad hoc changes that could compromise device quality or regulatory compliance. The auditor's role is to verify conformity to the QMS and relevant regulation, not to unilaterally approve deviations based on stakeholder preference. The emphasis on the documented QMS and the formal change control process directly aligns with ISO 13485, 2016 clauses related to document control, design and development, and management of changes. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes the immediate request of the head of sales, even if it bypasses established change control, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses the fundamental requirement of ISO 13485, 2016 for a controlled and documented QMS. It introduces an unacceptable level of risk, as changes to device labeling or instructions for use can directly impact patient safety and regulatory compliance. Ethically, it undermines the principle of quality and safety over commercial expediency. An approach that accepts the head of R&D's assertion without independent verification or adherence to the QMS's change management process is also a failure. While R&D personnel are knowledgeable, their opinions must be integrated into the QMS through defined processes. Failing to do so means the QMS is not being effectively implemented and maintained, potentially leading to unvalidated changes. This violates ISO 13485, 2016 requirements for verification and validation activities, an approach that defers the decision entirely to the quality manager without the auditor performing their due diligence in assessing the situation against QMS requirements is a missed opportunity for effective auditing. While the quality manager has ultimate responsibility, the auditor's role is to provide an independent assessment of conformity. Simply passing the buck without an audit assessment fails to fulfill the auditor's mandate and could allow nonconformities to persist. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the applicable standard, ISO 13485/2016 in this case, and relevant regulations. When faced with conflicting stakeholder input or proposed deviations, the auditor must first refer to the documented QMS procedures. The auditor should then gather objective evidence to assess the proposed change or situation against these documented procedures and regulatory requirements. This involves questioning the rationale, understanding the potential impact, and verifying if the proposed action has followed the established change control and risk management processes. If a deviation is proposed, the auditor must assess whether it has been formally documented, justified, risk assessed, and approved according to the QMS. The auditor's primary responsibility is to ensure the QMS is effective in meeting its objectives and regulatory obligations, not to facilitate commercial or departmental expediency at the expense of quality and compliance. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates that the internal audit team is evaluating the effectiveness of the quality management system, QMS, for a medical device manufacturer. The team is specifically examining how the organization has integrated the key principles of a QMS, as mandated by ISO 13485-2016, into its design and development processes. Which of the following approaches by the audit team would best demonstrate a deep understanding of QMS principles and their practical application in a regulated environment? Option A. Evaluating how the organization has embedded the principle of a process approach, ensuring that design and development activities are managed as interconnected processes with defined inputs, outputs, and controls, and that these processes are continuously improved based on feedback and risk assessment. Option B. Assessing the extent to which the organization has established and followed documented procedures for design and development, verifying that all required records are present and accurate. Option C. Reviewing the organization's customer satisfaction metrics and ensuring that feedback mechanisms are in place to capture complaints and suggestions related to design. Option D. Verifying that the organization has a dedicated quality assurance department responsible for overseeing all design and development activities to ensure compliance. The correct answer is B. Assessing the extent to which the organization has established and followed documented procedures for design and development, verifying that all required records are present and accurate. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge in implementing quality management systems, QMS, within the medical device industry, ensuring that the fundamental principles of QMS are not just documented but actively embedded in daily operations and decision-making. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires auditors to move beyond mere compliance checks to assess the effectiveness and integration of QMS principles into the organization's culture and processes. This necessitates a deep understanding of ISO 13485-2016 requirements and the underlying quality philosophy. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core of ISO 13485-2016, which emphasizes a process approach and continuous improvement driven by risk management and customer focus. By evaluating how the organization has integrated the principle of a process approach into its design and development activities, the auditor is assessing the systemic effectiveness of the QMS. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016 Clause 4.1, which requires the organization to establish, document, implement, and maintain a QMS and continually improve its effectiveness, and Clause 7.1, which outlines planning of product realization, inherently a process. A focus on process integration ensures that quality is built into the product lifecycle rather than being an afterthought. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the existence of documented procedures without verifying their practical application and integration into decision-making represents a superficial understanding of QMS effectiveness. This failure to assess the doing versus the documenting is a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. It implies that the QMS is a bureaucratic exercise rather than a tool for ensuring product safety and performance. Such an approach could lead to nonconformities being overlooked, potentially impacting patient safety and market access, which are critical ethical and regulatory considerations under ISO 13485-2016. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes adherence to a single QMS principle in isolation, without considering its interdependencies with other principles, and the overall QMS framework is also professionally unacceptable. For instance, focusing exclusively on customer feedback without a robust process for analyzing and acting upon it, or without linking it to risk management, fails to achieve the holistic intent of ISO 13485-2016. This can lead to a fragmented QMS where individual elements are addressed but the overall system's effectiveness is compromised. Ethically, this can result in missed opportunities to improve product quality and patient outcomes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 and any applicable regulatory addenda for the jurisdiction. 2. Identifying the core QMS principles relevant to the audit scope, e.g., process approach, risk management, customer focus, continuous improvement. 3. Designing audit procedures that go beyond documentation review to assess the practical implementation and integration of these principles into the organization's day-to-day activities and decision-making processes. 4. Evaluating the effectiveness of the QMS in achieving its intended outcomes, particularly concerning product safety and performance. 5. Considering the interdependencies between different QMS elements and principles to ensure a holistic and integrated system. Question 9. Upon reviewing the risk management process for a new Class Roman II medical device, the internal audit team needs to assess the effectiveness of the risk analysis techniques employed. The device is entering its final stages of design validation, and the company has primarily relied on historical failure data from similar, but not identical, legacy products. The audit team is considering whether this approach adequately addresses potential risks associated with the new device's unique features and intended use. Option A. Determine the effectiveness of the risk analysis by checking if the chosen techniques are primarily quantitative, allowing for objective measurement of risk levels and the calculation of risk reduction benefits, aligning with ISO 13485 Clause 8. 2. 1. Option B. Evaluate the risk analysis by confirming that the chosen techniques are documented in the quality manual and that the historical data used is readily accessible, ensuring compliance with ISO 13485 Clause 7. 1. 2. Option C. Assess the risk analysis by verifying that a cross-functional team, including R&D, manufacturing, and clinical affairs, has reviewed and validated the identified risks and mitigation strategies, ensuring a holistic perspective. Option D. Judge the risk analysis by confirming that the risk assessment process has been completed and documented, and that the chosen techniques are the most commonly used in the industry for similar devices, regardless of their specific applicability to the new device's unique aspects. The correct answer is B. Evaluate the risk analysis by confirming that the chosen techniques are documented in the quality manual and that the historical data used is readily accessible, ensuring compliance with ISO 13485 Clause 7. 1. 2. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the internal auditor to balance the need for robust risk analysis with the practical constraints of resource availability and stakeholder buy-in. The auditor must ensure that the chosen risk analysis techniques are not only compliant with ISO 13485, but also effective in identifying and mitigating potential risks to medical device quality and patient safety. The challenge lies in selecting methods that provide sufficient depth without becoming overly burdensome or impractical for the organization. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a thorough understanding of ISO 13485 requirements for risk management, Clause 7. 182. 183. It emphasizes a systematic, proactive, and stakeholder-inclusive process. By considering the entire product lifecycle and involving relevant departments, this approach ensures that risks are identified from multiple perspectives, leading to more comprehensive and effective mitigation strategies. This aligns with the ethical obligation to prioritize patient safety and product efficacy, which are fundamental to medical device regulation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on readily available historical data without considering emerging risks, future product development failures, to meet the proactive nature of risk management mandated by ISO 13485. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to unforeseen issues, potentially impacting patient safety and regulatory compliance. Ethically, it represents a failure to adequately protect patients by not anticipating potential harm. Another incorrect approach that relies exclusively on quantitative risk assessment tools without qualitative input overlooks the nuances and subjective elements inherent in medical device risk. While quantitative data is valuable, It may not capture all potential failure modes or their impact, especially for novel technologies or complex use scenarios. This can result in an incomplete risk profile and inadequate mitigation plans, violating the principle of thoroughness in risk assessment. A further incorrect approach that delegates risk analysis entirely to a single department without cross-functional input neglects the interconnectedness of product development, manufacturing, and post-market surveillance. ISO 13485 emphasizes a quality management system that is integrated across the organization. Siloed risk analysis can lead to missed risks that span departmental boundaries, creating gaps in the overall risk management process and potentially leading to non-compliance and patient harm. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific context of the medical device and its intended use. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders and their perspectives. Next, they should evaluate various risk analysis techniques against the requirements of ISO 13485, considering their suitability for the identified risks and the organization's resources. The chosen techniques should be integrated into the QMS and regularly reviewed and updated. Continuous improvement and a commitment to patient safety should guide all risk management activities. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates that the current process for evaluating and selecting new suppliers for critical components used in Class Roman II medical devices is perceived as overly time-consuming and has led to delays in product development. The internal audit team is tasked with reviewing the effectiveness of the supplier evaluation and selection criteria as per ISO 13485, 2016. Which of the following approaches would best address this feedback while ensuring regulatory compliance? Option A. Suggests that the supplier evaluation and selection process be entirely managed by the purchasing department, with minimal input from the quality assurance department to improve efficiency. Option B. Recommends streamlining the process by focusing primarily on the lowest cost quotations received from potential suppliers, as this will expedite selection and reduce overall project costs. Option C. Advise the purchasing department to rely solely on historical performance data of existing suppliers when considering new suppliers, assuming that past good performance guarantees future reliability. Option D. Review the documented supplier evaluation and selection criteria to ensure they are risk-based, clearly defined, and include objective evidence of their application and the effectiveness of supplier monitoring. The correct answer is D. Review the documented supplier evaluation and selection criteria to ensure they are risk-based, clearly defined, and include objective evidence of their application and the effectiveness of supplier monitoring. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where the internal audit function must balance the need for efficient supplier management with the absolute requirement for regulatory compliance, specifically concerning ISO 13485-2016. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the supplier evaluation and selection criteria in a way that is both practical for the organization and robust enough to meet the stringent demands of medical device regulations. The internal auditor must critically assess whether the current process adequately addresses the risks associated with outsourced processes and components, ensuring that supplier performance does not compromise the safety and effectiveness of the medical devices produced. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 7.4.1, which mandates that organizations establish and maintain criteria for the evaluation, selection, and re-evaluation of suppliers based on their ability to supply product in accordance with specified requirements. This approach involves a systematic review of documented criteria, evidence of their application, and the effectiveness of the supplier monitoring process. It ensures that the organization has a proactive and risk-based approach to supplier management, which is fundamental to maintaining product quality and regulatory compliance. This aligns with the ethical responsibility to ensure that all components and services used in medical devices meet the highest standards, thereby protecting patient safety. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical supplier performance without a documented, risk-based evaluation framework fails to meet the proactive requirements of ISO 13485-2016. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the need for established, objective criteria for initial selection and ongoing assessment, leaving the organization vulnerable to supplier issues that could impact product quality. Ethically, it represents a lapse in due diligence, potentially exposing patients to risks from substandard components or services. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on cost reduction as the primary selection criterion, without adequately considering quality and regulatory compliance, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. ISO 13485, 2016 explicitly requires that supplier selection be based on their ability to meet specified requirements, which inherently includes quality and regulatory adherence. Prioritizing cost over these critical factors can lead to the use of substandard materials or processes, directly impacting device safety and effectiveness, and violating the organization's ethical obligation to patient well-being. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire supplier evaluation process to the purchasing department without adequate QMS oversight or defined responsibilities is also problematic. While purchasing is involved, the QMS requires that the evaluation and selection process be controlled and documented, with clear responsibilities defined. A lack of QMS integration means that critical quality and regulatory aspects might be overlooked in favor of transactional purchasing considerations, leading to potential non-compliance and increased risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a thorough understanding of the relevant ISO 13485, 2016 clauses, particularly those pertaining to supplier management. The internal auditor must adopt a risk-based perspective, identifying potential failure modes in the supplier management process and assessing their impact on product safety and regulatory compliance. This requires examining documented procedures, records of supplier evaluations, performance monitoring data, and evidence of corrective actions taken. The auditor should engage with relevant stakeholders, including purchasing, quality assurance, and engineering, to gain a comprehensive understanding of the process and its effectiveness. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the organization's supplier management system is robust, compliant, and effectively mitigates risks to product quality and patient safety. Question 11. Examination of the data shows a consistent trend of minor deviations in critical component specifications from a key supplier over the past 3 audit cycles. While these deviations have not yet resulted in reported field failures or nonconformances with the finished medical device, the trend indicates a potential for future issues. The supplier has a history of generally good performance prior to this trend. What is the most appropriate internal audit action to address this situation in accordance with ISO 13485, 2016 requirements? Option A. Recommend initiating a formal corrective action process with the supplier to investigate the root cause of the deviations and implement preventive measures, with follow-up verification of effectiveness. Option B. Recommend immediate termination of the supplier contract due to the observed trend of deviations. Option C. Suggest a review of the supplier's quality manual to ensure it aligns with our requirements, without directly addressing the observed deviations. Option D. Conclude that the supplier's historical performance is satisfactory and no further action is required, as no product failures have occurred. The correct answer is A. Recommend initiating a formal corrective action process with the supplier to investigate the root cause of the deviations and implement preventive measures, with follow-up verification of effectiveness. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where objective data on supplier performance exists, but its interpretation and subsequent action are not straightforward. The difficulty lies in translating raw performance metrics into actionable insights that comply with regulatory requirements and ensure patient safety. The challenge is amplified by the need to balance the supplier's ability to improve with the manufacturer's responsibility to maintain product quality and regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirement for monitoring and evaluating supplier performance as stipulated by ISO 13485-2016, Clause 7. 4. 1. This clause mandates that organizations establish criteria for evaluation, selection, monitoring, and re-evaluation of suppliers based on their ability to supply product in accordance with specified requirements. By initiating a formal corrective action process based on objective evidence of nonconformance, the internal auditor is ensuring that a systematic approach is taken to identify root causes, implement effective remedies, and verify their efficacy. This aligns with the QMS principle of risk management and continuous improvement, ultimately safeguarding the quality and safety of the medical device. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without investigating current performance failures is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the ongoing monitoring requirement of ISO 13485-2016, Clause 7.4.1, which implies a continuous assessment of supplier capability. Relying on past good performance to overlook current issues is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it can lead to the continued supply of nonconforming components, potentially impacting device safety and efficacy. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate termination of the supplier relationship without a thorough investigation or opportunity for the supplier to rectify the issues is also professionally unacceptable. While decisive action may sometimes be necessary, ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7.4.1 encourages a process of evaluation and re-evaluation, implying that opportunities for improvement should be considered. Abrupt termination without due diligence can lead to supply chain disruptions, increased costs, and potentially the use of less qualified alternative suppliers, all of which can negatively impact product quality and patient safety. It also fails to uphold the principle of fairness and collaboration within the supply chain. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the available data, identification of specific nonconformances, and an assessment of their impact on product quality and patient safety. This should be followed by a determination of the appropriate course of action, which may include initiating a corrective action process with the supplier, conducting further audits, or, in severe cases, considering alternative sourcing. The decision should be documented, justified by objective evidence, and aligned with the organization's risk management procedures and QMS requirements. Question 12. Performance analysis shows that a medical device manufacturer's internal audit team has identified opportunities to streamline several key QMS processes, potentially reducing operational costs and improving throughput. When considering these optimization proposals, which of the following approaches best aligns with the overarching principles and requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 for Medical Device Quality Management System? Option A. Focus optimization efforts solely on areas with the highest potential for cost savings, even if it means bypassing some documentation requirements or validation steps, as long as the final product appears to meet basic specifications. Option B. Prioritize cost reduction and speed of implementation for all identified process optimizations, assuming that efficiency gains inherently improve the QMS without requiring extensive validation or adherence to formal change control procedures. Option C. Implement process optimizations that demonstrably maintain or enhance the ability to consistently provide medical devices and related services that meet customer and applicable regulatory requirements, ensuring the QMS remains effective and all changes are managed through formal change control. Option D. Implement process optimizations that significantly alter existing workflows to maximize throughput, with the understanding that regulatory compliance will be addressed reactively if any issues arise post-implementation. The correct answer is C. Implement process optimizations that demonstrably maintain or enhance the ability to consistently provide medical devices and related services that meet customer and applicable regulatory requirements, ensuring the QMS remains effective and all changes are managed through formal change control. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to balance the need for process optimization with the absolute requirement of adhering to the ISO 13485-2016 standard. The auditor must understand that while efficiency is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of compliance or the integrity of the quality management system, QMS, designed to ensure medical device safety and effectiveness. Misinterpreting the standard or prioritizing optimization over fundamental QMS requirements can lead to significant regulatory noncompliance and patient risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes that any proposed process optimization must be evaluated against the fundamental requirements of ISO 13485-2016. This means ensuring that changes do not compromise the ability to consistently provide medical devices and related services that meet customer and applicable regulatory requirements. It also means maintaining the QMS's effectiveness and ensuring that the optimization effort itself is documented and controlled as a change to the QMS, aligning with clauses like 4.1 General Requirements and 4.2 Quality Management System Documentation. This approach upholds the core purpose of ISO 13485, ensuring product safety and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on cost reduction without a thorough assessment of its impact on QMS effectiveness or regulatory compliance. This fails to recognize that ISO 13485-2016 mandates a QMS that ensures product safety and regulatory adherence. Cost reduction achieved by bypassing or weakening critical QMS processes, e.g., design controls, risk management, post-market surveillance, is a direct violation of the standard's intent and can lead to regulatory sanctions and patient harm. Another incorrect approach prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough validation and verification of the optimized process. ISO 13485-2016, particularly through clauses related to design and development, Clause 7.3, and process validation, Clause 4.1.6, requires evidence that changes do not adversely affect product quality or regulatory compliance. Rushing implementation without adequate verification can introduce unforeseen risks and nonconformities. A third incorrect approach suggests that optimization efforts should bypass the established change control procedures within the QMS. ISO 13485-2016, under clauses like 4.1.3 Control of Documents and 4.1.4 Control of Records, requires that changes to the QMS be managed and documented. Circumventing these procedures undermines the integrity of the QMS, making it difficult to trace changes, assess their impact, and demonstrate compliance during audits. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization within a medical device QMS by first understanding the core objectives of ISO 13485-2016, ensuring product safety, effectiveness, and regulatory compliance. Any proposed optimization must be rigorously assessed against these objectives and the specific requirements of the standard. This involves a structured approach. 1. Identify the optimization opportunity and its potential benefits. 2. Assess the impact of the proposed change on all relevant ISO 13485-2016 clauses, particularly those related to product realization, risk management, and regulatory compliance. 3. Document the proposed change and its assessment thoroughly. 4. Follow the organization's established change control procedures, which should be compliant with ISO 13485-2016. 5. Validate and verify the optimized process to ensure it meets all requirements and does not introduce new risks. 6. Update QMS documentation as necessary. This systematic, risk-based, and compliance-focused approach ensures that optimization efforts enhance the QMS without compromising its fundamental purpose. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for inconsistencies in the documentation of design verification activities within the quality management system. During an internal audit, the auditor observes that while design verification records exist, their level of detail and clarity varies significantly across different projects. Some records are concise, while others are more comprehensive, detailing specific test methods, acceptance criteria, results. The auditor needs to assess the adequacy of these documentation requirements. Which of the following approaches best evaluates the documentation requirements for design verification records in accordance with ISO 13485? Option A. Assess the brevity and conciseness of design verification records, prioritizing efficiency in documentation. Option B. Focus on the number of design verification records generated, assuming a higher number indicates better compliance. Option C. Verify that documented information exists for all design verification activities, ensuring it is accurate, adequate, and accessible for review. Option D. Confirm the presence of a documented procedure for design verification, assuming all records generated under this procedure are compliant. Correct answer is C. Verify that documented information exists for all design verification activities, ensuring it is accurate, adequate, and accessible for review. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the internal auditor to balance the need for comprehensive documentation with the practical realities of a medical device QMS. The auditor must not only identify deviations from ISO 13485, but also assess the potential impact of these deviations on product safety and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of detail and formality for documentation, ensuring it meets regulatory requirements without becoming overly burdensome or hindering innovation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core principles of ISO 13485 regarding documentation. It emphasizes verifying that documented information is adequate, accurate, and accessible, which are fundamental requirements for maintaining a compliant QMS. This approach aligns with the standard's intent to ensure traceability, control, and the ability to demonstrate conformity. By focusing on the adequacy and accuracy of documented information, the auditor is ensuring the QMS can be effectively managed and audited, thereby supporting product safety and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the presence of a document, regardless of its content or accuracy, fails to meet the spirit and intent of ISO 13485. This is a regulatory failure because the standard requires documented information to be controlled and maintained, implying it must be fit for purpose. Simply having a document does not guarantee it reflects current processes or regulatory requirements. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes brevity over completeness would be an ethical failure. While efficiency is desirable, the QMS documentation must provide sufficient detail to ensure consistent application and understanding. Omitting critical information, even for the sake of brevity, can lead to misinterpretation, noncompliance, and ultimately, risks to patient safety. This also represents a regulatory failure as it may result in documented procedures that do not adequately describe the actual processes. A further incorrect approach that assumes all undocumented information is implicitly compliant is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. ISO 13485 explicitly requires certain processes and information to be documented. Relying on implicit understanding or unrecorded knowledge bypasses the control mechanisms necessary for a robust QMS and can lead to inconsistencies and an inability to demonstrate compliance during regulatory inspections. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a risk-based approach. The auditor should first understand the specific documentation requirements of ISO 13485 and relevant national regulations. Then, they should assess the criticality of the documented information to product safety and regulatory compliance. The auditor should evaluate the adequacy, accuracy, and accessibility of the documentation, considering whether it provides sufficient detail for its intended purpose. Finally, the auditor should consider the potential impact of any identified deficiencies on the QMS and product quality, recommending corrective actions that are proportionate to the identified risks. Question 14. Analysis of the internal audit findings for a medical device manufacturer reveals that the supplier audit program is primarily driven by a target of auditing 20% of all suppliers annually, with no documented risk assessment to determine the criticality of suppliers or the components they provide. The audit team is questioning whether this approach adequately addresses the potential risks to product quality and patient safety. Which of the following approaches to supplier audits best aligns with the principles of ISO 13485 and demonstrates effective risk management? Option A. Conducting audits of all critical suppliers at least once every 2 years, regardless of their performance or the criticality of their supplied components. Option B. Prioritizing supplier audits based on a documented risk assessment that considers the criticality of supplied components, supplier performance history, and the potential impact on product safety and regulatory compliance. Option C. Focusing the audit schedule on suppliers that have had the most recent quality issues, ensuring that all past nonconformances are addressed. Option D. Implementing a system where the purchasing department independently selects suppliers for audit based on their commercial value to the organization. The correct answer is B. Prioritizing supplier audits based on a documented risk assessment that considers the criticality of supplied components, supplier performance history, and the potential impact on product safety and regulatory compliance. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, effectively managing supplier risk. Internal auditors must assess the adequacy of the organization's supplier audit program, particularly when faced with limited resources and a diverse supplier base. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thorough supplier oversight with the practical constraints of time and budget, ensuring that the most critical suppliers receive appropriate attention without neglecting others entirely. Careful judgment is required to prioritize audits based on risk, ensuring compliance with ISO 13485 and relevant regulatory requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core principle of risk-based decision-making inherent in ISO 13485. By prioritizing supplier audits based on a documented risk assessment that considers factors like the criticality of the supplied component, supplier performance history, and the potential impact on product safety and regulatory compliance, the organization demonstrates a proactive and systematic approach to quality management. This aligns with ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 7.4.1, which mandates the establishment and maintenance of purchasing information and controls for suppliers, including the basis for their selection, evaluation, and re-evaluation. A risk-based approach ensures that resources are allocated efficiently to mitigate the most significant potential risks to product quality and patient safety. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the volume of audits performed without considering risk is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the intent of ISO 13485, which emphasizes effectiveness and risk management, not just activity. Such an approach could lead to insufficient oversight of high-risk suppliers, potentially resulting in the use of non-conforming materials or components, which directly impacts product safety and regulatory compliance. This could also lead to wasted resources on low-risk suppliers, diverting attention from more critical areas. Another incorrect approach that relies on a fixed, arbitrary audit frequency for all suppliers, regardless of their risk profile, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of risk-based principles and can lead to either over-auditing low-risk suppliers or under-auditing high-risk ones. This approach is not aligned with the dynamic nature of risk management required by ISO 13485. An approach that delegates supplier audit responsibility solely to the purchasing department without adequate quality oversight or a defined risk assessment framework is professionally flawed. While purchasing is involved in supplier relationships, the ultimate responsibility for ensuring supplier quality and compliance with the QMS rests with the quality management system. This delegation without proper quality integration can lead to a disconnect between commercial considerations and quality requirements, potentially compromising product safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the organization's risk management policy and procedures. 2. Identifying critical suppliers and the components/services they provide. 3. Developing a documented risk assessment methodology for suppliers, considering factors such as criticality, historical performance, regulatory status, and potential impact on product safety. 4. Using the risk assessment to prioritize supplier audits and determine appropriate audit frequency and scope. 5. Ensuring that audit findings are effectively addressed and that corrective actions are implemented and verified. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the supplier risk assessment and audit program. Question 15. The control framework reveals that an internal audit team is reviewing the effectiveness of controls over a critical supplier of a key component for a Class Roman II medical device. The supplier has provided a self-declaration of conformity and a certificate of analysis for the latest batch. The audit team has also observed that the supplier's facility appears well maintained during a brief site visit. What is the most appropriate approach for the internal audit team to assess the control of this purchased product and service? Option A. Focus primarily on the cost-effectiveness of the supplier's offerings and ensure the component meets basic visual inspection criteria upon receipt. Option B. Evaluate the supplier's quality management system. Review documented evidence of their ability to meet specified purchase requirements and assess their performance monitoring processes. Option C. Accept the product based on the supplier's self-declaration of conformity and certificate of analysis, assuming their facility's appearance indicates good practices. Option D. Conduct a detailed visual inspection of the received components and rely on the supplier's assurance that their internal processes are adequate. The correct answer is B. Evaluate the supplier's quality management system, review documented evidence of their ability to meet specified purchase requirements, and assess their performance monitoring processes. Explanation: the control framework reveals a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, ensuring the consistent quality and compliance of externally provided products and services. The scenario is professionally challenging because the internal audit team must assess the effectiveness of controls over a critical supplier without direct access to the supplier's internal processes. This requires a nuanced approach that balances reliance on supplier documentation with the need for independent verification. The auditor must exercise careful judgment to determine if the established controls are sufficient to mitigate risks to the medical device's quality and regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core requirements of ISO 13485, 2016, specifically Clause 4.1.5, which mandates the control of purchased product and services. By focusing on the supplier's QMS, their ability to meet specified requirements, and the establishment of clear acceptance criteria, the audit team is proactively identifying potential risks before they impact the final medical device. This aligns with the risk-based approach inherent in ISO 13485, ensuring that controls are commensurate with the criticality of the supplier's contribution. The emphasis on documented evidence of supplier performance and the establishment of a supplier evaluation and monitoring process demonstrates a robust and systematic control mechanism. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the supplier's self-declaration of compliance is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for the organization to verify that purchased products and services conform to specified purchase requirements. Relying solely on a supplier's statement without independent verification introduces significant risk, as it bypasses the organization's responsibility to ensure quality. This represents a failure to implement effective controls as mandated by ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 4.1.5. Another incorrect approach that involves accepting products based on visual inspection alone, without considering the supplier's QMS or the product's ability to meet functional and performance specifications, is also professionally unacceptable. While visual inspection is a component of acceptance, it is insufficient on its own to guarantee conformity. This approach neglects the critical aspects of supplier control and the need to ensure that the supplier's processes are capable of consistently producing conforming product. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the comprehensive nature of supplier control required by the standard. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction over supplier qualification and performance monitoring is highly problematic. While cost is a business consideration, it must not compromise the quality and safety of medical devices. This approach directly violates the principle of ensuring that suppliers can consistently meet the organization's specified requirements, which is paramount for regulatory compliance and patient safety. It suggests a failure to adequately assess and manage supplier risk, potentially leading to non-conforming products and regulatory non-compliance. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based assessment of the supplier's criticality. This includes evaluating the potential impact of supplier non-conformity on the medical device's safety and performance. The audit team should then determine the appropriate level of control and verification required, which may include supplier audits, review of supplier quality data, and robust incoming inspection procedures. The focus should always be on ensuring that the supplier's processes are capable of consistently meeting the organization's specified requirements, and that these requirements are clearly communicated and verified. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that streamlining the management review process by reducing the frequency of certain data reviews and delegating some agenda item preparation to lower management levels could significantly reduce senior management time and associated costs. As an internal auditor for a medical device manufacturer, operating under ISO 13485-2016. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Recommend that the proposed changes be implemented only after a thorough assessment to ensure they do not compromise the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the management review process as required by ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5. 6. And that any changes are properly documented and their impact verified. Option B. Approve the proposed changes immediately, as the cost savings identified in the analysis are substantial and indicate a more efficient use of resources. Option C. Reject the proposed changes outright, as any alteration to the established management review process, especially one involving reduced senior management involvement, is inherently risky and likely to violate regulatory intent. Option D. Advise management to proceed with the changes and document them as a cost-saving initiative, assuming that the benefits of reduced time and cost outweigh any potential minor impacts on review effectiveness. The correct answer is A. Recommend that the proposed changes be implemented only after a thorough assessment to ensure they do not compromise the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the management review process as required by ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5. 6. And that any changes are properly documented and their impact verified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where a perceived inefficiency in a critical process, the management review, is identified. The challenge lies in balancing the need for continuous improvement and resource optimization with the absolute regulatory requirement for a robust and effective management review as mandated by ISO 13485. Internal auditors must critically assess whether proposed changes genuinely enhance effectiveness or merely reduce effort, without compromising the integrity of the review process and its ability to ensure the QMS remains suitable, adequate, and effective. The risk of overlooking critical quality issues or failing to meet regulatory expectations is significant. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes the regulatory requirements of ISO 13485 and the fundamental purpose of the management review. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 5. 6. Mandates that top management shall review the organization's QMS at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. This review must include assessment of opportunities for improvement and any need for changes to the QMS, including the quality policy and quality objectives. Therefore, any proposed changes must be evaluated against these objectives. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed changes to ensure they do not diminish the scope, frequency, or depth of the review, nor compromise the input data or the output actions required by the standard. It emphasizes maintaining the integrity of the review process to fulfill its regulatory purpose, which is to drive QMS improvement and ensure product safety and compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately approve the proposed changes based solely on the cost-benefit analysis indicating resource savings. This fails to address the core regulatory requirement of ISO 13485, which is the effectiveness of the management review, not just its cost. The ethical failure here is prioritizing financial gain over patient safety and regulatory compliance. This approach risks creating a superficial review process that misses critical issues, leading to potential noncompliance and harm. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the proposed changes outright without proper evaluation. While caution is warranted, a complete rejection without considering potential improvements that enhance effectiveness, even if they involve resource reallocation, is also a failure. This demonstrates a lack of proactive improvement and may lead to continued inefficiencies that could indirectly impact the QMS. The regulatory failure is not actively seeking opportunities for QMS improvement as required by Clause 5. 6. A third incorrect approach might be to implement the changes without documenting the rationale and the assessment of their impact on the QMS effectiveness. This would violate the documentation requirements inherent in ISO 13485 and undermine the audit trail for demonstrating compliance. The ethical failure is a lack of transparency and accountability in managing the QMS. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the explicit requirements of ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5. 6. They must then critically evaluate any proposed changes against these requirements, focusing on how the changes will impact the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the management review process. A structured risk-based approach should be employed, considering the potential consequences of implementing the changes. This involves gathering objective evidence, consulting with relevant stakeholders, including top management, and ensuring that any approved changes are properly documented and their effectiveness verified. The decision-making process should prioritize regulatory compliance and patient safety above all else, while also seeking opportunities for genuine QMS improvement. Question 17. Research into the scope of a medical device quality management system, QMS. During an internal audit, an auditor is reviewing the documented scope against the organization's actual operations. Which of the following actions by the auditor best demonstrates adherence to ISO 13485-2016 requirements for QMS scope definition? Option A. Verifying that the documented QMS scope explicitly covers all medical devices manufactured, including their design, development, production, installation, and servicing, as well as any related services provided by the organization, and confirming this aligns with the organization's current product portfolio and operational activities. Option B. Focusing the scope verification solely on the manufacturing processes, as this is the most critical stage for ensuring medical device quality and compliance. Option C. Excluding certain legacy medical devices from the QMS scope verification if they are no longer actively sold but still supported, to streamline the audit process. Option D. Accepting the documented QMS scope as provided by top management, assuming it accurately reflects the organization's activities without further verification, as top management is responsible for defining the scope. The correct answer is A. Verifying that the documented QMS scope explicitly covers all medical devices manufactured, including their design, development, production, installation, and servicing, as well as any related services provided by the organization, and confirming this aligns with the organization's current product portfolio and operational activities. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because defining the scope of a quality management system, QMS, for medical devices is foundational to regulatory compliance and patient safety. Misinterpreting or inadequately defining the scope can lead to critical nonconformities, product recalls, and ultimately harm to patients. The internal auditor must exercise careful judgment to ensure the QMS scope aligns precisely with the intended use, design, manufacturing, and life cycle of the medical devices the organization produces, as mandated by ISO 13485. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core requirement of ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 4. 1, which mandates that the organization shall establish, document, implement, and maintain a QMS and its processes, and shall determine the scope of the QMS. This approach ensures that all activities, products, and services related to the medical devices are encompassed within the QMS, thereby providing a robust framework for quality and regulatory adherence. It demonstrates a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and the critical importance of a well-defined QMS scope for ensuring the safety and effectiveness of medical devices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the manufacturing process without considering the entire life cycle, including design, distribution, and post-market surveillance, represents a significant regulatory failure. ISO 13485 requires a comprehensive QMS that covers all stages where quality can be affected. Similarly, an approach that excludes certain product lines or device classes that fall under the organization's responsibility would be a direct violation of the QMS scope definition, leading to potential noncompliance with regulatory requirements for those excluded devices. An approach that relies on outdated or generic scope documentation without verification against current operations and product portfolio is also a failure, as it does not reflect the reality of the organization's activities and could leave critical quality aspects unmanaged. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the organization's medical device portfolio, intended uses, and the applicable regulatory requirements, G. ISO 13485, 2016. This should be followed by a detailed review of existing QMS documentation, specifically the documented scope. The auditor must then verify this documented scope against actual operational processes, product lines, and services offered by the organization. This verification should involve interviews with key personnel, observation of processes, and review of relevant records. The auditor's judgment should be guided by the principle of ensuring that the QMS effectively covers all aspects necessary to consistently provide medical devices and related services that meet customer and applicable regulatory requirements. Question 18. Process analysis reveals that the organization's purchasing department has implemented a system for selecting and evaluating suppliers of critical components for its medical devices. The auditor needs to determine if this process adequately addresses the requirements of ISO 13485-2016, Clause 7. 4. Which of the following approaches by the auditor would best demonstrate compliance with the standard's intent for purchasing controls? Option A. Verifying that all suppliers have provided a signed declaration of conformity for every component supplied, without conducting any independent verification of the supplier's quality system or the component's actual performance. Option B. Reviewing a sample of supplier contracts to ensure they contain clauses related to quality and regulatory compliance, and verifying that the purchasing department has a documented procedure for supplier selection and evaluation that incorporates a risk-based assessment of supplier capability and the criticality of the purchased product. Option C. Confirming that the purchasing department maintains a list of all suppliers and that each supplier has undergone a basic background check to ensure they are a legitimate business entity, regardless of the criticality of the components they supply. Option D. Examining a random selection of purchase orders to confirm that the lowest priced supplier was consistently chosen, assuming that cost-effectiveness is the primary driver for supplier selection in a competitive market. The correct answer is B. Reviewing a sample of supplier contracts to ensure they contain clauses related to quality and regulatory compliance, and verifying that the purchasing department has a documented procedure for supplier selection and evaluation that incorporates a risk-based assessment of supplier capability and the criticality of the purchased product. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, ensuring that purchased components meet stringent regulatory requirements without creating undue burden on the purchasing department or suppliers. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust supplier verification with the practicalities of managing a diverse supply chain. The internal auditor must assess whether the purchasing process adequately addresses the risks associated with outsourced components, particularly those that could impact the safety and performance of the final medical device. This requires a deep understanding of ISO 13485 requirements related to purchasing controls and supplier management, as well as an awareness of the potential consequences of non-compliance, such as product recalls, regulatory actions, and patient harm. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based assessment of suppliers and purchased product. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 4. 1. Requires the organization to establish criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and re-evaluation of suppliers. This clause emphasizes that the extent of controls applied to purchased product and suppliers should be dependent on the potential impact of the purchased product on the medical device's quality. Therefore, a risk-based approach, which prioritizes more rigorous controls for critical components and suppliers with a history of issues, is the most effective and compliant method. This ensures that resources are allocated efficiently while maintaining the integrity of the supply chain and the safety of the medical device. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to apply the same level of stringent verification to all suppliers, regardless of the criticality of their components. This is inefficient and not mandated by the standard. ISO 13485-2016, Clause 7. 4. 1. Explicitly states that the extent of controls should be dependent on the impact. Applying excessive controls to low-risk suppliers is a misinterpretation of the standard's risk-based philosophy. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on supplier self-declarations without any independent verification or audit. While supplier self-declarations can be a starting point, ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 4. 1. Requires the organization to ensure that purchased product conforms to its specified purchase requirements. This implies a need for objective evidence of conformity, which may necessitate audits, inspections, or testing, especially for critical suppliers. Relying solely on self-declarations without due diligence poses a significant regulatory risk. A third incorrect approach would be to focus only on the price of components during supplier selection, neglecting quality and regulatory compliance. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 4. 1. Mandates that suppliers be evaluated based on their ability to supply product in accordance with specified requirements, which inherently includes quality and regulatory aspects. Prioritizing price over quality and compliance is a direct violation of the standard and an ethical failure that could lead to the use of substandard components, compromising device safety and efficacy. Professional reasoning. When faced with assessing a purchasing process, an internal auditor should adopt a risk-based methodology. This involves 1. Understanding the criticality of each purchased component to the medical device's safety and performance. 2. Evaluating suppliers based on their ability to consistently meet these critical requirements, considering their quality systems, regulatory compliance history, and capacity. 3. Implementing controls that are proportionate to the identified risks. This might include detailed supplier questionnaires, on-site audits for high-risk suppliers, incoming inspection of critical components, and ongoing performance monitoring. 4. Documenting the rationale for the level of control applied to each supplier and component. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating supplier evaluations and controls based on performance data and changes in risk. This systematic, risk-informed approach ensures compliance with ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 4. And upholds the organization's responsibility to ensure the quality and safety of its medical devices. Question 19. System analysis indicates that an internal audit of a medical device manufacturer's quality management system, compliant with ISO 13485, is underway. The auditor is reviewing the quality manual. Which of the following approaches to the quality manual's structure and content best aligns with the principles and requirements of ISO 13485 for an effective QMS overview? Option A. The quality manual is a dynamic document that is updated daily with the latest operational changes and contains specific instructions for every task performed within the QMS. Option B. The quality manual is a high-level document that defines the scope of the QMS, outlines the organization's processes, and clearly references other QMS documents where detailed procedures and work instructions are maintained. Option C. The quality manual is a comprehensive repository containing all detailed procedures, work instructions, and forms used throughout the quality management system. Option D. The quality manual is a brief document that primarily lists the quality policy and objectives, with minimal detail on the scope or interaction of QMS processes. Correct answer is B. The quality manual is a high-level document that defines the scope of the QMS, outlines the organization's processes, and clearly references other QMS documents where detailed procedures and work instructions are maintained. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in internal audits of medical device quality management systems, QMS, under ISO 13485. The challenge lies in discerning the appropriate level of detail and scope required for the quality manual when compared to other QMS documentation. Auditors must balance the need for a comprehensive overview with the risk of creating a document that is overly prescriptive, difficult to maintain, or redundant. The professional challenge is to ensure the quality manual effectively communicates the organization's QMS structure and scope, while remaining compliant with ISO 13485 requirements and facilitating efficient auditing. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the quality manual's role as a high-level document that defines the scope of the QMS, outlines the processes, and references other QMS documents where detailed procedures reside. This aligns with ISO 13485 2016, Clause 4. 2. Which specifies the quality manual shall include or reference the quality policy and objectives, the scope of the QMS, including details of and justification for any exclusions, and a description of the interaction between the processes of the QMS. This approach ensures the quality manual is a strategic document, easily updated, and serves as a roadmap for the QMS rather than a repository of operational procedures. It promotes clarity and efficiency in QMS management and auditing. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses on making the quality manual a comprehensive repository of all QMS procedures and work instructions. This fails to meet the intent of ISO 13485, which expects the quality manual to be a higher-level document. Such an approach leads to a quality manual that is excessively long, difficult to maintain, and prone to becoming outdated, increasing the risk of non-compliance. It also makes auditing less efficient, as auditors would need to sift through a large volume of detailed information within the manual itself, rather than using it as a guide to locate specific procedures. Another incorrect approach is to create a quality manual that is too brief and lacks sufficient detail to describe the scope of the QMS and the interaction of its processes. While the quality manual should not contain all procedures, it must adequately define the QMS's boundaries and how its key processes are integrated. A manual that is too superficial would not provide the necessary overview for stakeholders or auditors to understand the QMS's structure and applicability, potentially leading to misinterpretations or gaps in understanding the organization's commitment to quality and regulatory compliance. Professional reasoning. When evaluating the quality manual, an internal auditor should adopt a comparative analysis approach. The auditor should first understand the intended purpose of the quality manual as defined by ISO 13485. Then, they should examine the actual content of the quality manual and compare it against this intended purpose and the specific requirements of Clause 4. 2. The auditor should assess whether the manual clearly defines the scope, outlines the QMS processes, and effectively references other QMS documentation. This involves looking for a logical flow and a clear hierarchy of documentation. The decision-making process should involve asking, does this manual serve as an effective overview and guide to the organization's QMS? Does it meet the explicit requirements of the standard for its content and purpose? If the manual is too detailed, the auditor should recommend a revision to delegate detailed procedures to lower-level documents. If it's too vague, the auditor should recommend adding sufficient detail to define the scope and process interactions. This systematic comparison ensures the quality manual is a valuable and compliant component of the QMS. Question 20. Which approach would be considered the most effective and compliant method for transferring a new medical device design to production, ensuring both product quality and regulatory adherence under ISO 13485? Option A. Implementing a formal design transfer process that includes documented verification of manufacturing processes, validation of production, and formal review and approval of all transfer documentation by cross-functional teams, ensuring the QMS is capable of producing the product to specification. Option B. Prioritizing the speed of market entry by initiating production immediately upon receipt of design documentation, with post-production checks to identify any manufacturing issues. Option C. Utilizing informal communication channels and verbal agreements between design and production personnel to clarify any ambiguities in the design documentation during the initial production runs. Option D. Relying on the design team to provide comprehensive design drawings and specifications to the production team, assuming that the production team has the expertise to interpret and implement them without formal verification of the manufacturing process. The correct answer is A. Implementing a formal design transfer process that includes documented verification of manufacturing processes, validation of production, and formal review and approval of all transfer documentation by cross-functional teams, ensuring the QMS is capable of producing the product to specification. Explanation. The scenario of design transfer to production within a medical device quality management system, QMS, governed by ISO 13485, is professionally challenging due to the critical nature of ensuring that a product designed for safety and efficacy can be consistently manufactured to meet those same standards. The transition from design and development to commercial manufacturing involves multiple stakeholders, complex documentation, and potential for misinterpretation or oversight, all of which can directly impact patient safety and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all design inputs are adequately translated into production specifications, and that the manufacturing process is validated to produce a device that meets all intended uses and performance requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a structured, documented, and verified process for design transfer. This involves a formal review and approval of design transfer documentation by relevant functions, ensuring that all design and development outputs are complete, accurate, and suitable for manufacturing. It also mandates the verification of production processes and the establishment of acceptance criteria for manufactured product. This aligns directly with ISO 13485-2016 clauses such as 7.3.10 design transfer, which requires the organization to ensure that design and development outputs are transferred to manufacturing and that the QMS is capable of producing the product. This systematic approach minimizes risks of non-conforming product, ensures traceability, and provides objective evidence of compliance for regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the availability of design drawings without a formal verification of the manufacturing process fails to meet the requirements of ISO 13485. This approach would be a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the critical step of ensuring the production process itself is capable of consistently producing the device to specification. Ethically, it exposes patients to potential harm from devices that may not perform as intended due to manufacturing variability. Another incorrect approach that relies on informal communication and assumptions between design and production teams represents a significant QMS failure. This lack of documented evidence and formal verification is a direct contravention of ISO 13485 requirements for documented procedures and records, and it creates a high risk of errors and non-compliance, leading to potential regulatory action and product recalls. An approach that prioritizes speed of transfer over thorough validation of the manufacturing process is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for patient safety and regulatory obligations, prioritizing commercial expediency over the fundamental requirements of a medical device QMS. Professional decision-making in design transfer should follow a framework that prioritizes risk management and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485 and any applicable national regulations for design transfer. 2. Establishing a documented design transfer procedure that outlines the steps, responsibilities, and required documentation. 3. Conducting a thorough risk assessment of the design transfer process itself to identify potential failure modes. 4. Ensuring that all design outputs are clearly defined and translated into manufacturing specifications. 5. Implementing robust verification and validation activities for the production process. 6. Maintaining comprehensive records of the entire design transfer process as evidence of compliance and for future reference.